Greetings, my fellow philosophical thinkers. Elders News Podcast, my name is transmitting from the beautiful swampy land of South Florida, and today's date is Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. So let us begin. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Beautiful day in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm at Stash, which is adjacent with Revolution Live and America's Backyard in the heart of the Hemisphere District of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Yeah, so just kicking back, mellowed out. Do what I want. Do what I can. No complaints here, my friends. Today I want to be addressing Martin Luther King. I do recall in the past, in my younger years, reading stories, Mr. King was involved in the communist movement, and plus, one moment here. Yes, some of his claims to that and files should have been released a couple of years ago, claiming him to be a womanizer, adulterer, and all that. However, this mainly is published by ProjectMonarch.com. And just to let folks know, I'm not here to bash, condemn, or saying I hate black people. That's all irrelevant. But the thing to know is the dark side of him and a few other things as well. Alright, well, let's just begin here. This one's entitled The Revolution. The Revolution will not be televised. Martin Luther King and the fake civil rights movement. On January 21st, America will celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., a moderate civil rights leader with a far from spotless record who was shot at Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. During his lifetime, King was a controversial figure who plagiarized his doctoral dissertation, cheated on his wife, associated with communists, and was surveilled by the FBI. Yeah, remember, J. Edgar Hoover was a Nazi sympathizer, so it was a little political power game, you would say. Cloak and dagger. Today is forgotten as we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, but when I lived in Virginia, even that day was shared with two slave-owning Confederates, Generals Robbie Lee and Stonewall Jackson, to make Lee Jackson King Day. I have nothing against holidays from work or against Confederate generals, but maybe they should be celebrated on a different day. I think that's how they would have wanted it. It reminds me of the time they put a statue of Arthur Ashe, the black tennis player, on Richmond's Monument Avenue, where statues of Confederate heroes Jefferson Davis, Robbie Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and G.E.B. Stewart also stand. The celebration of King is false. His dream of racial equality never happened, and he was killed. My students at Lake and Black University, where I teach, know the score. So do blacks in our nation's capital, who live only a few miles away from my daughter's neighborhood, but go to a racially segregated school. Racism is alive and well in America, and very few blacks have anything in common with former President Obama, who won the Nobel Peace Prize solely for his skin color. And a lot of us know what President Obama is about. And I will go on with that. When King was assassinated in 1968, the country erupted in race riots as black people burned down their own neighborhoods. Sad provocateurs redirected this understandable political anger of black people into the street violence, and they killed King to set off the powder keg. Today, CIA tried to do the same thing with the Yellow Vest movement, attempting unsuccessfully to infiltrate it, to make it violent so they can destroy it. Of course, you gotta look at all these areas, and there's a lot of links on here too you folks can check out. Likewise, CIA seeks to sexualize political anger. They're always looking to amplify and redirect anger, transforming it for something that could change a corrupt system into something that destroys good people. CIA destroyed black neighborhoods for years, starting illegal drug wars abroad and importing heroin and cocaine into inner city neighborhoods. There's not just a war on whites, there's wars on blacks, the two together, a war on humanity. Of course, it shows here about the disadvantages, sentencing, and so forth, how biased it is between ethnic groups and so forth. That's from the Sentencing Commission, U.S. Sentencing Commission. But meanwhile, we hold up Martin Luther King if we remember him at all. The post office closes and children have a day off from school. Why King? Why not Malcolm X or Fred Hampton? Or somebody else? That is true. You gotta look at one of those areas as well. And we'll continue on here. But because the revolution will not be televised. There's a video clip on that as well. How about a day for Malcolm X, a real black hero who emphasized black self-determination and self-defense. Malcolm was a courageous advocate for the rights of blacks, a man who called out America for its crimes against his people. He exposed the sexual behavior of Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, which he later disavowed. Malcolm X made a vital contribution to black power. He was assassinated by the Nation of Islam, whose leader wore a Masonic and Satanic symbol hat on his hat. You can look at there with that hat and the Baphomet. How coincidental. Hey, looks like there's Bush wearing a similar hat. Yeah, definitely check it out, folks. Very symbolically indeed. As indicated by Elijah Muhammad's funny headgear, the assassination of his real leaders and his ultimate failure, not to mention the way in which the mainstream co-opted much of the civil rights movement, it seems to be a CIA creation, which was used to expand the power of the federal government, destroy states' rights, and grant no real gains to African Americans. And here's a little advertising here. And we'll continue on here. This is just like fake feminism, which I have written elsewhere, and you can look at this yourselves. So, folks, check it out. Very interesting stuff here. What fueled the civil rights movement? False flag attacks on black churches, which gave the federal government just the excuse it needed. The New World Order loves false flags, and there's plenty of ammunition on that as well. Of course, always research false flag attack, strategy of tension, and PSYOP. Since Barry Goldwater, the John Birch Society, and others opposed federal civil rights legislation, not because they were racist, but because it was an unwarranted expansion of federal government that did absolutely nothing to help black people. Because of these positions, they were labeled as a lunatic fringe. Now, and based on that, you can always look at federal overreach. Federalist Papers number 46, written by James Madison. I just retweeted some stuff by the John Birch Society, which I tend to join, and you know just what it does with Kathy O'Brien's article? Twitter strips off the picture. There's a photo here saying, Kathy O'Brien, American hero. I have known change since 1975. That's from the Transformation of America. The New World Order feared the John Birch Society, which has 100,000 members at its peak. The society opposed the civil rights movement, claiming that a worldwide conspiracy had created and it supports states' rights under the Constitution. It opposes one world government, the United Nations, free trade agreements, and increasing immigration. Club of Rome, indeed. It argues that globalization has devalued the Constitution and it fears the creation of the North American Union. Robert Rush, the founder of the John Birch Society, identified Illuminati groups like Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission, and he opposed the civil rights legislation. John Birch Society could not be induced to violence, and it stood against the New World Order, so the CIA sought to discredit it. On the left, Bob Dylan made fun of their paranoia and compared them to the Nazis. That's just plain slander, since Birches were fighting the Nazis who worked for the CIA and the NSA. And I remembered some folks out there, John Birch Society Blues. So, of course, you're going to have that propaganda. So, right there, Bob Dylan is nothing more than a governmental stooge during this time. I don't know about now, but something to look at. That's why I don't go. I guess why I don't really go too creative with some of these performers and artists and so forth with their trend bandwagoneering, I would say. So I'll continue on. On the right, Bill Buckley dismissed John Birch Society, calling Welsh's conspiracy theories far removed from common sense. Of course, you got to hear that as well. And this one here is, we're in Buckley popping for the establishment. Well, there's a lot of videos in here, so you can check it out yourselves. When a former CIA agent who belonged to Skull and Bones, like Bill Buckley, starts agreeing with Bob Dylan, something's going on. Both Bob Dylan and Buckley, like the Birchers, were the fake civil rights movement. They were also against Barry Goldwater. So mind control at its finest. Goldwater rejected the legacy of the New Deal. Still, the New World Order closed ranks against him, promoting Johnson for president and painting Goldwater as a madman. He didn't kill Kennedy, some cowboy Episcopalian Jew from Arizona could steal the presidency back from the American people. I didn't mention Goldwater served as the vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that investigated MK Ultra, and there's a transcript on that. Here you can see him holding a heart attack gun used by CIA, much like the one they used to kill my grandfather, who worked for the War Department. But let's return to overreaching civil rights legislation that Goldwater and the John Birch Society opposed. Oh, excuse me here. Let's got a little relaxing here. Did do anything for the black people? They still live on the other side of town in neighborhoods riddled with crime. Now, instead of a few of them being lynched, more of them are shot by police. You got a train coming by? Alright, sorry about that. Heavy train coming by here. What's this here interesting about black people mostly looks like they'd be killed by the police. And like 1 in 3 to 1 from the population. And interesting too about unarmed. 30% of were unarmed, and very disturbing indeed. To say 30% of black victims were unarmed in 2015 compared to 21% of white victims. And of course, those police shootings are what Fred Hampton wanted to stop. I bet you never heard of them. Unlike Barry Goldwater and Robert Welch, he was a black socialist, but each of these American heroes stood in his own way against the New World Order. So that's interesting with that. So interesting with that. At least it's against the New World Order. And continuing down here, they're all for limited police power. They were all for gun rights, which are, by the way, under attack through CIA's Operation Gladio C. And you can really look at those up as well. And so, like it says here, Hampton took an activism to a new level, defending African Americans with other Black Panthers. He followed the police on their patrols, watching out for police brutality, and using his knowledge of the law to protect himself and others, as the Panthers said, "We're gonna police the police." Fred Hampton also worked at the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, to effect social change through community organizing and nonviolent activism. He worked to establish more and more recreational facilities to improve educational resources for black people. He was instrumental with the Black Panthers Free Breakfast Program, and he brokered a non-aggression pact between Chicago's most powerful street gangs. Hampton was on the verge on bringing a gang with thousands of members into the Black Panthers Party, which would have doubled its membership, and he worked with organizers of other races, like the Young Patriots, convinced the people that poor blacks and poor whites had things in common and should stand together against tyranny. And there's a lot of videos on here too, so check it out, folks. Fred Hampton was about to be appointed as a Black Panther Party Central Committee Chief of Staff when the Chicago Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation murdered him. Drugged by an FBI infiltrator, he was asleep in his bed next to his pregnant fiancée when the pigs killed him. One policeman said he's barely alive, he'll make it. And the other two fired more shots into Hampton's head point blank, saying, "He's good and dead now." "Let's remember Hampton," he said. "I'm a revolutionary." Interesting stuff. So folks, actually read these, watch these videos. And when you got folks out there that make strong impact, they get threatened, they get harassed, they get murdered, they associate individuals that can be considered infiltrators. This is why I don't believe in civil rights. I believe in natural rights. And every single one of us on this planet, even in the United States, have it. That is the real thing. Organic, active movement is a threat to the order, the establishment, the tyrants in our lives. I would just like to say, you always got to look at things a lot bigger than what it is. And for me, I always observe things more thoroughly, be more complex. You're always going to have jackals, doesn't matter where they're at. Never follow the bandwagoners, because they could be part of the establishment, bought and paid for. And you got others that do care, stand for unity, like the men talked about before mentioned. And I like to give you a couple of definitions about natural civil rights and natural law. It's both from the Legal Dictionary.org, which is a Black's Law Dictionary. It says, what is civil rights? These are the rights that are granted to every citizen of the United States by the Constitution and all of its amendments. Equal protection and guarantee to everyone, regardless of race, color, and creed. So the whole thing is that it's always been written by men. And what is natural law? A rule of conduct arising out of the natural relations of human beings established by the Creator and existing prior to any positive percept. Webster. The foundation of this law is placed by the best writers in the will of God, discovered by right reason and aided by divine relation, and its principles, when applicable, apply with equal obligation to individuals and to nations. And we all have those rights, natural born, which are inalienable, guaranteed under the Declaration of Independence. And you can say the 9th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and even within our state constitutions, regardless of where you live. Those are the ones we got to really focus on. The true individuals that stood up for what was right. always be aware of what's going on around you. Even when they have these riots, even look what happened in Paris with the car bombings. They could all be staged to put people into submission due to fear. And those are, relevant perspective. Like I said, celebrate Martin Luther King. That's great, but always note these other individuals that stood for what was right, and proceed to carry that torch of liberty. Governing yourselves is great. Being a government dependent is not. It's entrapping you and others you care about. And that's all I want to talk in this particular subject. And over here, do one more, do a short and sweet one today. Alright, so is that all well and good? Yeah, that'll be cool. This one here came from Brandon Smith from Bob Livingston Alerts. Will globalists sacrifice $1 to get their new world order? Trade is a fundamental element of human survival. No one person can produce every single product or service necessary for a comfortable life, no matter how Spartan their attitude. Unless your goal is to desperately scratch an existence from your local terrain with no chance of progress in the future, you're going to need to network of other producers. For the most in history of human civilization, production was the basis for the economy. All other elements were secondary. At some point, as trade grows and thrives, society is going to start looking for a store of value, something that represents the man hours and efforts and ingenuity a person put into their day, something that is universally accepted with barter networks, something highly prized that is tangible, that can be held in our hands and is impossible to replicate artificially. Enter precious metals and stones. Thus, the concept of money was born, and for the most part, it functioned quite well for thousands of years. Unfortunately, there are people in the world that see economy as a tool for control rather than a vital process that should be left alone to develop naturally. The idea of fiat money, which has no tangibility and that can be created on a whim by a central source of authority, is rather new in the grand scheme of things. It is bastardization of the original and much more stable money system that existed before, that was anchored to hard economies. While it claimed to offer more liquid store of value, the truth that is no store of value at all. Purveyors of fiat, central banks and globalists use ever-increasing debt as a means to feed fiat, not to mention the hidden tax of price inflation. When central bankers get hold of money, it is no longer a representation of work or value, but a system of enslavement that crushes our ability to produce effectively and to receive fair returns for our labor. There are many people today in the liberty movement that understand this dynamic, but even in alternative economic circles, there are some that do not understand the full picture when it comes to central banks and fiat mechanisms. There is a false notion that paper currencies are a lifeblood for the establishment and that they will seek to protect these currencies at all costs. This might have been true 20 years ago or more, but it is not true today. Things change. This kind of delusion in the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, it is a thought by some to be an untouchable, a pillar of the global structure that will be defended for many decades to come. The reality, however, is that the dollar is nothing more than another con game on paper to the globalists, a farce that they are happy to sacrifice in order to further their goals, the complete centralization of the world trade and therefore complete centralization of control over human survival. It is to say, the dollar is a stepping stone for them, nothing more. The real goal of the globalists is an economic system which they can monitor every transaction, no matter how small. A system in which there is eventually only one currency, a currency that can be tracked, granted, or taken away at a moment's notice. Imagine a world in which your stored value is subject to constant scrutiny by a bureaucratic monstrosity, and there is no way to hide from it, using private trade as a backstop. Imagine a world which you can hold your money in your hand, and access to your money can be denied with the push of a button before you step out of line. This is what the globalists really desire. Some people might claim that this kind of system already exists, but they would be fooling themselves. Even though fiat currencies like the dollar are cancer on a free market and true production, they are still offer privacy to a point, and they can still be physically allocated and held in your hand and making them harder to confiscate. The globalists want to make a big bad thing and make it even worse. So the question arises, how do they plan to make shift from current fiat paper system to the New World Order economy? First and foremost, they will seek a controlled demolition of the dollar as the world reserve currency. They have done this in the past with other currencies, such as the pound sterling, which was carefully diminished over a period of 2 decades. Just after World War II, though, the world of treasury bond dumps by France and the U.S., as well as forced removal of the sterling as a petrol currency. This was done to make way for the U.S. dollar as a replacement after Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. The dollar did not achieve the true world reserve status until after the gold standard was completely abandoned by Nixon in the early 1970s, which point a deal was struck with Saudi Arabia, making the dollar the petrol currency. Once the dollar was no longer anchored to gold and the world's energy market was made to depend on it, the fate of the U.S. economy was sealed. Unlike Britain and the sterling, the U.S. economy is hyper-dependent on the dollar's world reserve status. While Britain suffered declining conditions for decades after the loss, including inflation and high interest rates, the U.S. will experience the more acute pain. A complete lack of adequate production capability within U.S. borders has turned our nation to a consumer-based society rather than a society of producers, meaning we are dependent on the demand of our currency as a reserve in order to enjoy affordable goods from other manufacturing-based countries. Add to this lack of production ability the fact that for the past decade, the Federal Reserve has been pumping trillions of dollars into the fiscal financial markets around the globe. This means trillions of dollars held overseas only on the promise that those dollars will be accepted by major exporters as a universal store of value. If faith in that promise is lost, those trillions could come flooding back into the U.S. through various channels, and buying power of the currency would crumble. Yeah, something happened up on the clerk's desk, but he's okay. There's a delusion within the American mainstream that even if such an event were to occur, the transition could be handled with ease. It's fantastical. I know, but never underestimate the cognitive dissonance of people blinded by bias. The rebuilding of a production base within the United States to offset the crisis of losing the world reserve currency would take many years, perhaps decades, and this is the best case scenario. When plummeting currency and extreme price inflation, the cost of establishing new production on a large scale would be immense. While labor might become cheap in comparison with inflation, all other elements of the economy would become very expensive. In the worst case scenario, there would be complete societal breakdown, likely followed by an attempted totalitarian response by government, in which case, forget any domestically funded economic recovery. Any future recovery would have to be funded and managed from the outside of the U.S. And here is where we see the U.S. globalist plan taking shape. The banking elites have hinted in the past how they might try to reset the global economy. As I've mentioned in many articles, the globalist-run magazine The Economist in 1988 discussed the removal of the dollar to make way for a global currency, a currency which would be introduced to the masses by 2018. This introduction did in fact take place as The Economist declared it would. Here's how I believe this process will unfold. In 2008, the crash in credit and housing markets led to unprecedented money printing by central banks, with the Federal Reserve leading bank as the greatest source of inflation. This program of bailouts and QE stimulus conjured an even bigger bubble, in which many alternative analysts have dubbed the everything bubble. The growing everything bubble encompasses not just stock markets or housing, but auto markets, credit markets, bond markets, and the dollar itself. All these elements are now tied directly to Fed policy. The U.S. economy itself is not only addicted to stimulus measures and near zero interest rates, it will die without them. The Fed knows this well. Chairman Jerome Powell hinted at the crisis that would evolve if the Fed ever cut off stimulus, unwound its balance sheet, and hiked rates in the October 2012 Fed minutes. Without constant and ever-expanding stimulus measures, the false economy will implode. We are already seeing the effects as the Fed cuts tens of billions per month in assets from its balance sheet and hikes interest rates to their neutral rate of inflation. Auto markets, housing markets, and credit markets are in reversal, and stocks are witnessing the most instability since the 2008 crash. All this was triggered by the Fed simply exerting incremental rate hikes and balance sheet cuts. The Fed will continue tightening either by rate hikes, assets cuts, or both at the same time. The Fed's purpose is to create a crisis. The Fed's goal is to cause a crash. The Fed is a suicide bomber that does not care what happens to the U.S. system. But what about the dollar specifically? The Fed's tightening policies do not only translate to crisis for U.S. stocks or other markets. So I see the three primaries in which the dollar can be dethroned as a world reserve. One, emerging economies have also become addicted to Fed liquidity over the past 10 years. Without continued access to the Fed's easy money, nations like China and India began to seek out alternatives to the dollar as a world reserve. Contrary to the popular belief that these countries would never be able to decouple from the U.S., the process has already begun. And it is the Fed that has actually created the necessity for emerging markets to seek out other sources of liquidity besides the dollar. Two, Donald Trump's trade war is yet another cover event for the loss of reserve status. If the trade war continues through the next year, it's only a matter of time before China, already seeking dollar alternatives as the Fed tightens liquidity, will start using its U.S. Treasury and dollar holdings as leverage against us. Bilateral agreements between multiple nations that cut out the dollar are being established regularly today. If China, the largest exporter-importer in the world, stops accepting the dollar as a world reserve, or if they start accepting other currencies of competition, then numerous other nations will follow their lead. Interesting standpoint there, right? Three, finally, if a war of words between Trump and the Fed becomes something more and Trump undermines the faith in U.S. credit, or if he shuts down the Fed entirely, the globalists are handed yet another perfect distraction for the death of the dollar. I can see the headlines now. The reset could then be painted as a rescue of the global economy and the destructive actions of populists who bumbled into fiscal destruction because they were blinded by an obsession with sovereignty in a world that requires centralization to survive. You see what's going on? It'll be a good manipulative game. The specifics of shift to a global currency are less clear, but again, we have hints from the globalists. The economists suggest that the U.S. economy will have to be taking down a few pegs, and that the IMF would step into arbiter of forex markets through its SDR basket system. This plan was echoed by recently globalist Mohammed Al-Arain in an article he wrote entitled New Life to the SDR. That's a question mark, of course. Iran also suggests that a global currency will help combat the rise of populism. The economist notes that the SDR would only act as a bridge to the new global currency. Paper currencies will still exist for a time, but they will be pegged to the SDR exchange rates. Currently, the dollar is only worth around 0.71 SDRs. In the event of the loss of the world reserve status, except this exchange rate dropped significantly. As the global crisis deepens, the IMF will suggest a reset to a more manageable monetary framework, and this framework will be based on a blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, which the IMF has likely already developed. The IMF has this outcome in at least 2 separate white papers recently published, which herald a new age in which crypto is the next phase of evolution for global trade. Without ample resistance, the introduction of a cashless society will be presented as a natural and even heroic response by the globalists to save humanity from the selfishness of destructive nationalists. So it'll be a witch hunting game, to be exact. They will strut across the world stage as if they are saviors rather than villains that they really are. Well, my friends, you gotta always prepare yourselves with it, because it has happened before. The fall of the Reichsmark, 1928. Even in Argentina, central banks, look what happened to Greece. Central banks, IMF, they love playing that power game and point their fingers at garbage. Not garbage, but false accusations, slandering, libeling. They'll probably do this with the Trump administration. And don't get me wrong, for your first-time listeners, I don't worship the man, but always examine the bigger picture. So that's why on the state level, we should need to go focus more on gold and silver transactions, which I know some certain good amount of states are doing that, which is great. The gold depository in Texas is awesome, and honor Article 1, Section 8 and 10 of the U.S. Constitution. It'll be a little rough, but things can be done in a period of time. Well, so whatever you do, folks, don't panic if it happens. Just prepare yourselves and your family the best of your abilities. Because when you do, in the long run, you'll be better off. Alright, folks, that is it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share this throughout your social media networks. Any questions, comments, or send something into me I want to check out. Whatever you do, please address your correspondences with decorum. I would love to hear from you. In addition, a lot of all my footnotes will be on my Spreaker page. Check it out. Hit that thumbs up, etc. Alright, my friends. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the maniac resistance is healthy for the soul, can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.